Can we do about the workforce sustainability? So I'm accepting the proposition that's already out there in the public arena that can you hear me now? In the public arena that there is a blockage in the pipeline in terms of the reproduction of anthropologists at the entry level and at the expert, the other end of the pipeline. And what I'm going to do this afternoon is just give you an overview, because this is a complex and what you might call a wicked problem. So I'm not going to go into all the nuances here, apart from giving you this overview, which comes in part from my position in CNTA and dealing with a number of stakeholders and with organisations who are talking about these issues. So first of all, to just give you some of the background, because there have been reviews of anthropologists in the sector starting in 2004, which the tribunal commissioned, going on to 2013 and 14 when it was the university was looked at as a sector who might be able to teach different subjects in different universities. That went nowhere particularly. And then in 2016, AAS did a survey of anthropologists who worked in native title and land rights to try and quantify the number of people who were involved. And then in 2022, CNTA did a survey of our sector again. So the most successful outcome of all those reviews, really, in terms of something actually happening, was the development at UWA of a graduate course in anthropology for native title work. And I think, David, there might have been 80 people who graduated from that course who've all gone on to work in WA in that sector. So what do we know? I'm referring here to the 2022 survey, which is up on the website of CNTA. So you can look at that yourself. It's not only categorised in terms of issues that people raise, but there's a lot of qualitative comments there too, which go right to the heart of how people experience the workforce and the workforce issues. But the three critical issues that came out were there's no career path. That was the number one. The second one was burnout due to heavy workloads and stressful field interactions. And the third one is the moral hazard issue. And that's the association between anthropology's history and colonialism. Now, this is putting a lot of younger people off because, in a way, I suppose anthropology is being compared with learnings from Indigenous studies, and therefore young people want to do the right thing. They come with a social justice principle behind them. They're wanting to do the right thing, but at the same time they're feeling perhaps that this isn't the kind of career they should be in. Maybe they're taking a job away from an Indigenous person. So that sets up this tension already. From our survey, we had a 75% response rate. So I think we can take these three key themes that emerged as pretty much representative of the sector. Now, what's the workforce size and gender like? Well, there's an estimated 150 to 200 anthropologists in the sector. That's an approximate, it's not an exact figure. It's predominantly women at the moment, and younger women, whereas I think in about 2004 it was predominantly men. So that's shifted. Honours degree is still an entry requirement, but by and large the sector has a higher qualification amongst most people who are working in it now than simply the honours level, and we hear that in some universities honours level is going to drop out anyway, so this will raise a question about what will be the benchmark entry point. There's no background necessarily now for people coming in who've worked or had an education in what we might call the classical Indigenous relations. People might be coming with an understanding of Indigenous literature or Indigenous political history, but not necessarily the basis on which we are gathering evidence, which is around the classical relationships with land and sea. And then there's the challenge of what's called the psychosocial risk, which corporate Australia is now also dealing with. And this is the issue of people being affected by their work and the sorts of things that we've talked about a good deal, and that is when people are asked to look at some of the historical material documents on families, family removals and things like this. People find this very difficult to deal with, and of course in terms of what we're doing to remediate this, which everybody is talking about as well, is trauma-informed research. So I won't go into all that, but many of you will be aware of that. External threats, you'll all know these. They've been talked about for some time now. One is poaching by corporate law firms, and the other one particularly is recruitment to cultural heritage work, where there's leakage from native title organisations into the cultural heritage sector. That's a bit hard to counter because organisations are grant funded and they're not like corporates who can perhaps set salaries at different kinds of rates than grantees can. Oh. No? So has anybody got some literacy here?
The screen's gone blank.
Push the other out.
Yeah, just move the mouse.
No? Backspace? No? Yes.
What did you push?
I pushed the button to the next slide. I thought.
Okay.
Next is gone.
I'll continue, and you have to just imagine what's on the slides. One of the things I've just mentioned then, before the computer died, was the external threats. But there are also internal threats. For example, there's a small provider, there's competition in this small pool of service providers who are working in native title. So you've got the 11 or 12 organisations potentially all vying for the same small pool of people, which makes it difficult. And to dive into the organisations and look what's happening between the organisations, and this goes to the question of lack of career path. There's lack of parity in the formalised performance and skill standards and varying pay scales. So this again makes it quite difficult to navigate where you're going to go, and also what's attractive. We also learned, if anyone read, and I think it's again on the CNTA website, the Women in Anthropology report that was done. which indicated that women are being underpaid by and large, and not also aware that you can actually negotiate your pay rate, and sometimes two people in the same organisation were on different pay rates as a consequence. I didn't do anything, I promise.
I
Just press the button.
just lost the battery on the laptop.
So there is also a tertiary gap. So, you know, where are people getting their training from? Well, by and large, it's on the job. The tertiary gap, there are few tertiary institutions teaching or researching Indigenous Australian anthropology now. And thanks to Trinity, who did a whip round, he indicated that 12 of 16 universities had some Indigenous units, but 6 were available at only 2 of the universities, and that's ignoring Indigenous studies. Now, the Federal Court has also done a whip round to see who was teaching some of the subjects apart from anthropology that relate to native title, and that's law, and it was a similarly dispiriting result. So one of the issues is, while we have a glitch in our pipeline, so does law in native title. Just wait a moment to see if I can get my slides back. Okay, 5 minutes, that'll, okay. All right, so look, whose hand's on the lever if we're going to change? This one here. This one? No, next one. So whose hand's on the lever to make change? And I'm not going to give you a ready solution here because, as I said at the outset, this is a wicked problem, and it's the intersection of many stakeholders and interest groups. Is there an appetite for change? Yes, there is, but as far as I can see, many of the institutions who want change are looking in the wrong direction. What are the key barriers to change, and what will derail change? And what outcomes can we identify in the short, medium, long term? These are questions for ourselves as a profession and within organisations. So one of the things I've been thinking about is internal options as an organisation or as a sector, and we've had some great input, and I'd like to thank the managers who were involved in this. So this view that's coming out and these suggestions are coming from our own sector. That's a homegrown. But you need to map your local barriers and enablers, separate the technical tasks from the capabilities in work, if work level standards. We also looked at recruitment, and people are not necessarily right on the ball with what they're asking for, what skills are essential, for example, and what are desirable. I saw one advertisement for an organisation that had a high threshold of expectations and asked for a graduate. And I rang them and I said, you can't get someone who's going to be able to do this at graduate level. And some time later they rang back and said, would you have another look? We've rethought the application. The landscape, by that I mean at sector level. Well, we can grow our own approach to training. We can do some advocacy work. Some of these things are in train. Educating widely, we've always had some talk about educating inside the university. I don't know how much leeway you'll get with that nowadays. And then finally, the strategic approach. Recruiting, who is the target cohort? It's a question we need to ask ourselves because we're in a tension with Indigenous studies at the university level. And I would suggest at the level of popular culture too, anthropology versus Indigenous studies in the popular imagination is in competition. And then to ask the question, when we want change, who do we look to for support, and who and where are our allies? Now, these are questions I'm not going to answer for you, but they're questions that come up when we look about how we're going to deal with this kind of issue. Thank you.